I was dreaming about the ocean when they knocked on my door. Not a polite knock, the kind that rattles the frame. The kind that says we are not asking. 3 pounds. Pause. 3 more pounds. I sat up in the dark. Heart already running before my mind caught up. The clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. My wife, Donna, stirred beside me. What is that? I was already on my feet. I pulled on a shirt and walked to the front door of our house, the house I'd spent 11 years paying for. The house where we'd brought our daughter home from the hospital. The house with the rose bushes Dana planted the spring after her mother died. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 figures in dark jackets. One of them held up a badge before I even touched the lock. I opened the door. Marcus Hale, the taller one, said. He had a jaw like a concrete block and eyes that had practiced looking at people without seeing them. Yes. You're under arrest for wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud the federal government. He said it the way someone reads a grocery list. Please step outside and place your hands behind your back. I didn't move for a second. Not because I was going to run, there was nowhere to go. And besides, I hadn't done anything. I didn't move because I genuinely could not understand what I was hearing. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. My name in the same sentence as those words felt like someone had handed me a document written in a language I'd never studied. There must be some mistake. I said, Sir, hands behind your back. Dana appeared at the end of the hallway. She was wearing the blue robe I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. Her hair was loose. She looked at me, then at the agents, then back at me. Her expression was, and I've thought about this moment more times than I can count, carefully neutral. Not panicked. Not confused. Careful. Marcus. She says. Just my name. Nothing else. They walked me off my own porch in handcuffs. The drive to the federal building downtown took 40 minutes. I sat in the back of a black SUV, with my wrists locked together, and watched the city pass by the window gas stations. Traffic lights. A 2-4-hour laundromat where a man sat alone reading a newspaper. Normal life continuing at 3 a.m. While mine came apart at the seams, I replayed the last 6 months in my head the entire drive. I'm a government contractor. Have been for 16 years. My company, Hale Integrated Solutions, provides cybersecurity infrastructure to mid-level federal agencies, not the glamorous end of the work, but steady, necessary, and done right. I had a clearance level that most people don't know exists. I had a reputation that took 15 years to build. I had contracts that were renewed year after year because my team delivered. Every single time. I also had, apparently, a wife who had been feeding information about those contracts to a competing firm for the better part of 2 years. I didn't know that yet. That part came later. What I knew, sitting in the back of that SUV, was that I was innocent and terrified in equal measure, and that the look on Dana's face when they walked me out, that careful, neutral look, had lodged itself somewhere behind my sternum like a splinter I couldn't reach. They put me in a room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a fluorescent light that buzzed slightly off-key. A paper cup of water appeared at some point. I didn't drink it. The agent who came in first was younger than the ones at the door. He had the energy of someone who had been told this was a big case and was trying not to show how excited he was about that. He set a folder on the table, opened it, and began asking me questions about a specific contract I delivered 18 months ago, a data routing system for a regional logistics office attached to the Department of Transportation. We have records of unauthorized access to that system, he said. The IP trail leads back to devices registered to your company. That system has 37 people with access credentials, I said. 22 of them work for me. The other 15 are on the government side. What specifically are you saying I did? He looked at the folder. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the folder again. Mr. Hale, it would be in your best interest too. I want my attorney. I said, I've been polite about this, but I want my attorney now. He closed the folder and left the room. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Might have been 40 minutes. Might have been 90 time. Does strange things in a room with no windows. I thought about my daughter, Lily, who was 8 years old and sleeping in her bed with the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. I thought about whether anyone had called to tell her where her father was. I thought about Dana's face again. That neutral expression. Then the door opened. And the world shifted. He didn't walk in the way I expected. I had imagined, if I'd imagined anything at that point, more of the same. Another agent. Another folder. Another set of questions, delivered with the confidence of a man who had already decided the answers. Instead, the door opened and a woman in her early 60s walked in wearing a charcoal blazer and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Behind her came two men in suits. I could tell were expensive even across a fluorescent-lit room. Behind them came a man I recognized from news briefings and two congressional hearings I'd watched from my living room couch. Director Raymond Carver, head of the FBI's Cyber and Infrastructure Division. He was taller in person. He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. Just like that. No fanfare. He set his own folder on the table, thicker than the young agent's. Dark blue cover, and folded his hands on top of it. Mr. Hale, he said, I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I was breathing. There was a significant failure at several levels of this investigation. He continued. Your arrest tonight was, he paused, choosing the word with visible care, premature, and wrong. The woman in the charcoal blazer, who I would later learn was Deputy Director Elaine Marsh, set a single sheet of paper on the table in front of me. It was a document releasing me from custody. At the bottom, it bore two signatures I recognized. One of them was Carver's. What happened? I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Carver looked at me. He had the face of a man who had spent decades sitting across from people in rooms like this one. And for the first time in hours, I felt like I was being looked at by someone who was actually seeing me. What I can share with you right now is limited, he said, because there is an active investigation. And you are no longer a subject of it, you are a material witness. What I can tell you is that the breach in your system originated from inside your household, not your office, your home network. The room went very quiet. The devices used, he said, were not company devices. I won't pretend I understood everything in that moment. Understanding came in pieces over the weeks that followed. The way a bruise rises slowly to the surface after the impact has already happened. Here is what I learned. Gradually. Then all at once, Dana had been approached 14 months earlier by a man named Gerald Foss, a name I'd never heard, a face I'd never seen, who worked as a talent acquisition consultant for a private defense firm called Viridian Partners. Viridian was a competitor of mine, smaller but aggressive, and they had been losing bids to Hale Integrated Solutions for 3 consecutive contract cycles. Foss had found Dana through a networking event she attended on my behalf when I was traveling for work. He had been charming. She would later say, he had seemed harmless. What Foss offered, in exchange for access to my proprietary project files and bid documents, was money. Not a spectacular amount. $60,000 across 14 months. Deposited in increments into an account she had opened without telling me. $60,000 and, I imagine, whatever it felt like to have a secret, to have something that was entirely hers. I have spent a great deal of time thinking about that last part. The FBI had been investigating Viridian Partners for 7 months by the time they knocked on my door. The arrest order had been generated by a junior analyst who had traced the breach to my home IP address and moved too fast. without running the secondary verification protocols that would have revealed the specific device Dana's personal laptop kept in the home office she used for her freelance graphic design work. The room I almost never went into because it was her space and I respected that. The junior analyst had since been reassigned. I was driven home in the same black SUV. This time without handcuffs. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. I remember the color of it, that particular gray-purple that exists for about 20 minutes before the sun decides to commit. I watched it through the window and felt something I couldn't name. Not relief. Not yet. Something more like the sensation of standing in a doorway. Not quite inside or outside anything. Dana was in the kitchen when I got home. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and her hands wrapped around it. And when she heard the door, she looked up and something crossed her face that I still can't fully read. It wasn't guilt. Exactly. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of a person who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. Marcus, she said. The FBI told me. I said, about the laptop. About Foss. About Viridian. She set down the coffee cup. How long were you going to let me sit in that room? I asked. The silence that followed was one of the longest of my life. The refrigerator hummed. Outside. A bird started testing its voice against the morning. I didn't know they were going to arrest you. She said. Finally. I thought the investigation was about Viridian. I didn't think it would come back to. She stopped. Started again. When they showed up at the door, I panicked. You watched them put handcuffs on me. I said. You said my name and nothing else. I know. Lily was asleep 20 feet away. I know. Marcus. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time. Long enough for the gray-purple sky to give way to something paler and more decisive. Long enough for the coffee to stop steaming. I need you to call your sister. I said. You should stay there for a while. She didn't argue. I'm not sure what I expected. But the absence of an argument was somehow the most devastating part of the morning. The legal process that followed was long and procedurally complicated and not particularly cinematic. Dana cooperated fully with the FBI. I am told she was, in the words of her own attorney, exceptionally cooperative, and, in exchange for her testimony against Gerald Foss and 3 senior executives at Viridian Partners, she was charged with a single misdemeanor count and sentenced to 2 years probation and community service. Foss received 4 years. Viridian Partners was dissolved pending a civil suit brought jointly by 2 federal agencies and 3 of the competitors they had undercut using stolen bid data. The suit is still ongoing as of the time I'm telling you this. My company survived. That surprised me more than almost anything else. I had expected clients to run. Nobody wants to be associated with a contractor whose home became a conduit for espionage, even if that contractor was the victim. But Director Carver's office released a statement within 72 hours of my release that was unusually specific about my cooperation, my clearance status, and the nature of the breach. It didn't save every contract, but it saved enough. I hired 3 new people that fall, including a cybersecurity analyst who specializes in internal network monitoring. I moved my home office to a different location. I changed more passwords than I care to count. The hardest part to explain, and I know people want a clean narrative here. A villain and a victim and a lesson is that Dana was not monstrous. She was not some character from a thriller. She was a woman who had been quietly unhappy for reasons she had never figured out how to say out loud, who had made a catastrophic decision for a collection of small reasons that probably felt, in the moment, survivable. That doesn't excuse it. I want to be clear about that. What she did put me in a federal holding room at 3 a.m. It cost me a marriage. See Cleo. 4 months of sleep. And the version of my life I thought I understood, but I've stopped requiring her to be a monster. It was taking too much energy. and I needed that energy for other things. I filed for divorce 7 weeks after the arrest. It was finalized 8 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse downtown, in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and old wood. I signed the papers, shook my attorney's hand, and walked out into a parking lot where the October light was doing something extraordinary to the leaves on a row of oak trees along the sidewalk. I stood there for a minute, just stood there. My phone buzzed. It was Lily, calling from her mother's sister's house where she'd been staying. "Dad," she said, "can we get dinner tonight? I want pizza." "Yeah," I said. "We can get pizza. Can I pick the toppings?" "You can pick the toppings." "Okay," she said. There was a pause. "Dad." "Yeah." "Book, are things okay now?" I looked at the oak trees, the light through the leaves, the parking lot, the ordinary, unremarkable afternoon. The world continuing to operate on its own quiet terms. "Things are getting okay," I said. "They're not all the way there yet, but they're getting there." She seemed to think about that. Then, "Okay, I want banana peppers on my half." "Banana peppers," I repeated, "and black olives." "You're a complicated person." "Lily." "I know," she said, with enormous 8-year-old satisfaction. "Hurry up. I'm hungry." Director Carver called me personally 3 months after the arrest. Not about the case that had been handed off to other departments by then, but to follow up. He asked how the company was doing. He asked how I was holding up. I told him, with some honesty, that I was still in the process of figuring that out. He said something I've thought about since. He said, "The cases that go wrong before they go right are the ones people forget to account for. The system assumes it's going to catch the right person. When it doesn't, the correction is quiet. I want you to know this one was noticed." I thanked him for that. I meant it. What I didn't say, what I thought about later. Driving home from a dinner I'd eaten alone at a restaurant I'd chosen at random because it was lit warmly and the menu had too many options, which meant I spent a long time with it. Which was what I needed, was that being noticed by a system, after it has already failed you, is a particular kind of thing. Not nothing. Not enough. Something in between. Like that gray-purple sky I'd watched from the SUV while the sun was making up its mind. I'm writing this from my home office, the new one. In the corner of the house with the window that faces east. It's early. Not 3 a.m. Early. Not that kind of early. The kind where the light is new and the coffee is still hot, and the day hasn't committed to anything yet. Lily stayed with me last weekend. She is, as of last month, officially in the 3rd grade, which she reports is more serious than 2nd grade, though she is handling it. She has her mother's hair and her grandmother's stubbornness and a particular way of laughing that is entirely her own, a sudden, whole-body thing. No warning. No apology. I don't think about the holding room much anymore. I think about that parking lot sometimes. The oak trees. The light. I think about the knock on the door at 3:17 a.m. Less as the moment things fell apart, and more as the moment I started finding out what was true about my marriage, about my business, about which of my clients stuck around when things got complicated, about what I was actually made of in the hours between the handcuffs and the apology. The answer to that last one surprised me. I turned out to be someone who could sit in a metal chair in a fluorescent-lit room for 90 minutes, with his hands cuffed and his life dismantling itself outside the door, and still ask for his attorney, instead of confessing to something he hadn't done. That's not nothing. That's actually something I had to learn was true about myself. And I think that might be the part of the story that matters. Not the director walking in. Not the apology. Not the case collapsing like a building whose foundation was never there. Those things happened. And they mattered. And I'm grateful for the correction even if I'm still paying the price of the error. But the part I come back to, the part I want Lily to know someday, when she's old enough to hear the whole story, is the part where her father sat in a room in the dark and didn't break. That's the story. That's the one worth keeping.